He was crying over his ex's engagement, and the next day he got down on one knee in front of me. I said no and soon found out that he had flown overseas to win her back. I met Alex, who was 24 at the time, at a party 3 years ago, one of those loud, slightly chaotic get-togethers where the music was just a bit too loud and everyone seemed to be talking over each other in clusters that shifted around the room like clouds. He was sitting silently in the corner, nursing a drink and looking completely out of place, his eyes scanning the room as if he was counting down the minutes until he could leave without it seeming rude. I probably wouldn't have noticed him at all if our mutual friend Jake hadn't waved me over and introduced us, laughing as he said, "This is Alex. He's not as moody as he looks, I swear." And when Alex looked up at me, his smile was small but genuine, the kind of smile that made you pause for a second because it felt rare, like something he didn't give out freely. Within minutes of talking, it became clear that he wasn't cold or standoffish at all. He was just shy, careful with his words, and clearly more comfortable listening than trying to shout over a crowd. There was something quiet and thoughtful about him that pulled me in almost immediately, something that made me want to know what else was hiding beneath the silence. I, Emily, 22 at the time, was the first to write to Alex after the party, unable to shake the curiosity he'd left in me with his quiet presence and thoughtful eyes, and though I half expected him not to respond, something told me to try anyway. We started communicating, slowly at first, with gaps of time between his replies that made me wonder if he'd lost interest or just didn't know what to say, but every message he did send was warm, honest, and carried this unmistakable sincerity that made me want to keep the conversation going. Even with the physical distance between us, me living in Oregon and him in Washington, we found ourselves drawn into something deeper, exchanging stories, favorite books, small worries, and long tangents about everything from music to the way the sky looked after it rained. Eventually, despite the few hundred miles that separated us, we decided to give it a real try and started dating, planning visits around work and classes, and making space in our lives for each other in ways that neither of us had expected when we first met. Last year, I made the decision to move to Alex's city, believing in what we had built enough to uproot my life and start fresh in a place that felt unfamiliar but full of promise. I found a job within a few weeks, and after some initial growing pains, we moved in together, settling into a small but cozy apartment that quickly began to feel like home. At first, everything seemed to be going well. We laughed a lot, shared late-night dinners, explored the city together, and slowly began blending our daily routines into something that felt stable and intimate. But as time passed, the edges of Alex's past started to bleed through the surface, in ways I didn't immediately recognize as warning signs. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just small comments that hinted at old wounds or moments when he would shut down emotionally without explanation. The man I had known to be soft-spoken and thoughtful began showing flashes of something harder, more guarded, and I found myself wondering what parts of him I hadn't yet seen, and what stories were buried beneath the quiet. Alex had only one serious girlfriend before me, a woman named Samantha, and though I never met her in person, I learned about her gradually through scattered mentions and quiet pauses in conversation, the kind that made me realize she had left more of a mark on him than he wanted to admit. They had dated for several years and, according to him, had remained friends even after their breakup, something he spoke about with a kind of detached fondness, like he was proud of how mature and civil they had managed to be despite everything. But over time, especially when we got closer, I started to notice that whenever her name came up, even casually, there was a flicker of something unsettled in his expression, a tension he tried to hide with a too quick smile or a sudden change of subject. He told me that she had been the one to end things, and that it had happened 2 years ago before we met, and that since then they drifted apart, no longer in regular contact. Still, I could feel her presence like a shadow in the room, unspoken but never entirely gone, and part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she still lingered somewhere in the corners of his mind, just out of reach. I saw a picture of Samantha once, purely by accident, when Alex was scrolling through his old photos and paused a little too long on one of them, and even though he quickly swiped past it, that single image was enough to plant a quiet ache in the back of my mind. She was beautiful in a way that felt effortless, the kind of woman who didn't seem to have to try to be magnetic, with sharp eyes, a confident smile, and a presence that lingered even through a screen. It wasn't just her looks that unsettled me, it was the way Alex spoke about her sometimes, not directly, but through the quotes and thoughts he would casually attribute to her, almost like little echoes of her still lived in the things he admired. He'd say things like, "Samantha used to say," or, "That reminds me of something Sam once pointed out," with no malice, no awareness that each mention chipped away at something I didn't know how to name. I didn't say anything though. I swallowed it down and smiled through the discomfort, afraid that if I brought it up, I'd come off as insecure or jealous, even though what I felt was something much deeper. like I was quietly competing with a ghost who still whispered in the back of his mind. One night, long after midnight when the world outside was silent and even our little apartment seemed to hold its breath, I woke up and saw Alex sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone glowing faintly in the darkness. At first, I thought he was just scrolling aimlessly, maybe unable to sleep like he sometimes was after a stressful day, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized he wasn't just browsing. He was staring at a photo, unmoving, his shoulders trembling slightly. I shifted just enough to glimpse the screen without making a sound, and that's when I saw it. An engagement photo of Samantha, beaming alongside another man, her hand proudly displaying a ring. Alex's face was crumpled in a way I had never seen before, silent tears slipping down his cheeks, and he wiped them away quickly, as if ashamed even in the darkness. I wanted so badly to reach out to him, to ask what he was feeling, to remind him I was there, but instead I lay frozen, heart pounding, pretending to be asleep because deep down, I knew this was a grief I wasn't invited into, a sadness that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with a chapter of his life I would never be able to rewrite. For 2 months after that night, Alex cried constantly, sometimes muffled under the covers when he thought I was asleep, sometimes locked away in the bathroom with the faucet running to cover the sounds of his grief, but no matter how hard he tried to hide it, the sorrow in him was impossible to miss. Every time I gently asked if he was okay, offering him a way to open up, he would give me a new excuse, each one thinner and more fragile than the last, as if he were desperately patching cracks in a dam that had already burst. One night it was an old dog from his childhood that he suddenly claimed to be mourning. Another time he blamed a commercial on TV that he said had hit him harder than expected. Other nights, it was the stress of work, the pressure of deadlines, the vague weight of adult responsibilities pressing down on him. I nodded and accepted his explanations, even though a part of me was quietly breaking each time, knowing in my heart that none of those things were the real cause. He was mourning a future he had once imagined with someone else, and no matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I wanted to believe we could build something just as beautiful, I couldn't compete with the memory of a life he had already lost. I suggested therapy one evening, trying to keep my voice gentle, careful not to sound accusing or impatient, because I truly believed it could help him find a way through the pain he was carrying so heavily on his own. But Alex immediately dismissed the idea with a sharpness that startled me, scoffing that therapy was for weaklings and insisting he could handle everything himself, that he didn't need to sit in a stranger's office to talk about his feelings like some kind of broken thing. After that, I didn't bring it up again, afraid of pushing him further away, and on the surface, we avoided any major conflicts, keeping things polite and functional, smiling at each other when we passed in the hallway, sharing meals with the television filling the silence. But underneath, he became more and more withdrawn, like a shadow of the man I had fallen for, disappearing a little more each day behind walls I couldn't climb no matter how much I tried. The distance between us grew so quietly, so gradually, that sometimes I didn't even notice it happening until I reached out for him and found only emptiness in the space where he used to be. During breakfast one morning, after spending so many nights lying awake with the question gnawing at me, I finally gathered the courage to ask Alex directly if he still loved Samantha, needing to hear the truth from him even if I already suspected the answer in my heart. I tried to keep my tone calm, almost casual, as I buttered my toast and stared down at my coffee, but inside I was bracing for the impact of whatever he might say. He barely looked up from his plate, responding with a quick, dismissive no, as if the question itself was ridiculous, an annoying distraction he wanted to swat away without thought. Before I could press further, before I could read anything in his face, he stood up, grabbed his bag and said he was going to be late for work, leaving the half-eaten breakfast and the thick, unspoken weight of his words behind him. I sat there alone at the kitchen table, the silence louder than anything he could have said, knowing deep down that his answer hadn't really answered anything at all. I found it completely by accident one evening when Alex had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, a document sitting there without even a password protecting it, as if part of him didn't care if I saw or maybe just never imagined that I would look. It was an email draft addressed to Samantha, and as I read the words, my heart sank so heavily it felt like it might drag me right down to the floor. In the message, written only a few weeks ago while we were very much still together, he begged her to come back, pouring out his feelings in long, desperate sentences that left no doubt about where his heart truly was. He told her that he still thought about her every day, that nothing felt right without her, that he would do anything to be part of her life again if she would only give him the chance. Reading it was like being punched in the gut, like every small suspicion I had tried to silence had suddenly come screaming to life in front of me, undeniable and cruel. It wasn't ancient history. It wasn't something he had left behind before meeting me. It was happening right there, in the middle of the life I thought we were building together, and in that moment, I realized that I had been living with a man whose heart had never truly been mine. The next morning, as if the world hadn't cracked open for me the night before, Alex asked me to marry him, standing in the kitchen with a small, nervous smile, holding out a ring that felt more like a heavy chain than a promise. He didn't get down on one knee, didn't say anything heartfelt or personal, just asked in a tone that almost sounded rehearsed, as if he had decided overnight that I was the next best option after his real dream had slipped away. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I could see the desperation leaking out from behind his forced smile, the hollow panic in his eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with fear of being alone. I already knew what he hadn't said out loud yet, that Samantha had turned him down, that she had closed the door on whatever flickering hope he had been clinging to, and now he was scrambling to build something with me, not because he couldn't live without me, but because he couldn't stand to face the emptiness left behind. Standing there with his hopeful ring in my face, I felt nothing but a cold, aching clarity that the man I loved had never really chosen me at all. I called my father, Tom, as soon as Alex left for work that morning, my hands shaking as I dialed the number, needing the steady voice of someone who had always loved me without conditions or hesitation. Without asking many questions, my father told me he would be there within a few hours, and when he arrived, we packed my things quietly but efficiently, boxing up the pieces of a life I had once believed in but now realized had been built on borrowed dreams. I moved back into my old house that same evening, the familiarity of the walls and the creak of the floorboards a small but needed comfort against the overwhelming ache in my chest. When Alex realized I was gone, he called and messaged relentlessly at first, leaving voicemails full of accusations and disbelief. He said I was making things up, that I was being paranoid, that I was throwing the good stuff out the window, clinging desperately to a version of events that painted him as the wronged one. But no matter how many words he threw at me, I knew deep down that leaving wasn't a mistake or a reaction. It was the first real act of love I had shown myself in a long time. He had already thrown away the good stuff long before I packed my bags. All I had done was finally recognize it. After we broke up, Alex's behavior shifted from desperate pleading to something far more unsettling, something that made my skin crawl every time my phone buzzed. He started writing to my friends, sending them long, rambling messages accusing me of stealing from him, fabricating wild stories about things I had supposedly taken, twisting the truth so badly it was almost unrecognizable. When my friends either ignored him or defended me, he moved on to calling me from unfamiliar numbers, sometimes several times a day, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between angry rants and tearful apologies. It didn't take long before every unexpected call or message made my heart jump into my throat, and I realized with growing horror that what I was experiencing wasn't just a bitter ex acting out, it was stalking, plain and terrifying. I had left because I wanted peace, because I needed to protect the parts of myself that still believed in love and trust, but now it felt like he was determined to drag me back into his chaos, to punish me for refusing to be his consolation prize. The fear settled in my chest like a permanent weight, and I knew then that walking away had been the right choice, but it was only the beginning of what I would have to fight to get my freedom back. My mother, Linda, became my anchor during those chaotic weeks, stepping in with the kind of fierce, steady love that only a mother who has seen her child hurting can give, and she helped me change my phone number, block every unfamiliar call, and take the first real steps toward restoring my peace of mind. She sat with me late into the night when the fear made it hard to sleep, reminding me in 1,000 small ways that I was not alone, that I was stronger than what had happened to me, and that no amount of noise or threats from Alex could take away the life I was rebuilding. My friends, too, stood firmly by my side when I finally told them everything, laying out the pieces of the story I had once kept hidden out of shame or hope that things might somehow fix themselves. They didn't question me, didn't ask for proof or demand explanations. They just believed me without hesitation, and wrapped me in a wall of quiet, determined support that made it easier to breathe again. Knowing that the people who mattered most saw the truth for what it was gave me the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time, away from the wreckage of who Alex had been and toward a future that, for the first time in a long time, truly belonged to me. Now I am focusing on my new paid internship, throwing myself into work that challenges me and reminds me of everything I am capable of when I am not weighed down by someone else's chaos, and for the first time in a long time, I am thinking seriously about moving, about starting fresh somewhere new where there are no memories lingering around every corner. It is not easy, rebuilding never is, but every small step I take feels like a quiet victory, a reminder that healing doesn't have to be loud or dramatic to be real. Maybe someday there will be a new love, someone who sees me fully without needing to fix or reshape me to fit their needs, someone who chooses me because they recognize my worth, not because they are trying to fill a void left by someone else. But right now, I am not rushing to find that person because I know now, more clearly than I ever have before, what kind of love I deserve. I deserve a love built on honesty, respect, and real partnership, not desperation or manipulation, and until that love finds me, or until I find it, I am perfectly okay building a life that feels good and whole all on my own.